Please call me Joanne. As you see, the lovely picture that Howard chose is before UEH me. Um, so I have, now have the biblical hoary head. So my father was the silver fox, but I don't suppose anyone wants to call me the silver vixen, so that's fine. So thank you, Peter, for inviting me, and Howard for inviting me. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Hope everyone has a great season, a wonderful Christmas, and I guess I will just go straight into sharing. Take my dog off the screen to start with. 1 second. Sorry, I got distracted by these canine creatures. All right, so here we go. So I'm probably going to share things that everybody knows, but I think I'd just like to put things in perspective because there's a lot we take for granted in the Caribbean. So, right, so we are here. Some of you are not here, but we also have huge Caribbean diaspora. So when I talk about the Caribbean, I'm talking about not just the islands of the Caribbean or the areas in the surrounding Central and South America, but the entire Caribbean diaspora from Japan to the US and back. So we have so many definitions of the Caribbean. Some of us just talk about the islands and refer to it as the insular Caribbean. Venezuela boasts that it has the biggest coastline of the Caribbean. It's the secret of the Caribbean. And most of us just think of Venezuela as South America. I mean, Trinidad is actually part of South America because our mountains are the ends of the Andes, and we are part of the Amazon. But of course, we are both Caribbean and South America. Then we talk about the Greater Caribbean, where we include everybody washed by the Caribbean Sea. We divide things up into the Greater Antilles and the Lesser Antilles based on size and location. Then we talk about the Windward Islands and the Leeward Islands. We have organizations like the Association of Caribbean States. We have organizations like CARICOM, which used to be for the Commonwealth Caribbean, but now includes Haiti and Suriname and has quite a few applicants. Dominican Republic trying to be an observer, but there's some problems there because of their relationship with Haiti in recent years. So many definitions, and when we say Caribbean, the general assumption is that we are referring to the islands, but we can't forget what Richard Alsop called the rimlands, because I mean, we can take a very centralist position that the islands are the focus, and then anything that, as I said, washed by the Caribbean Sea is still the Caribbean, because of the seas don't divide, seas unite, people go on boats, they move around, and I am not fixing on one perspective. I'm just going to take the Caribbean Sea perspective. Wherever is touched by the Caribbean Sea and the diaspora. So we have 51 countries in the Caribbean, in the Americas, and 31 of them belong to the Caribbean. So half of the Americas is actually Caribbean. And 21 out of those 31 have English as an official language. So we get the impression that there are lots of English speakers or English-related speakers in the Caribbean. However, let me just flash back to this. So in terms of countries, we have 31 out of the 51 countries. In terms of languages, there are 700 languages, 1,000 languages in the Americas, and the Caribbean has over 70 languages. And by those, we include the indigenous languages of Guyana, Suriname, French Guiana, and Belize. And if we were to include everybody else, it'd be even more. We're including all the European languages, whether they came as conquerors or, indentured servants or any of those groups. African languages, a few still survive. Lots of Creole languages, Asian languages, primarily the Indic ones and Chinese, but then we have Javanese, we have Japanese, we have many more, and sign languages. So there's a huge diversity that's quite untapped, and that's what we kind of want to look at today. So the truth and the unfortunate truth is that we have lost and are losing many more of our languages. And even the languages that are surviving, languages must change, languages must vary. But many of the languages that we have are even losing things as basic as their vocabulary in favor of more technologically adaptable and appropriate vocabulary. So in terms of populations, the general question we can ask about the Caribbean, or Caribbean, whichever one you want. We in Trinidad, we don't even know what we say. Caribbean Airlines has one of those automatic messages. Welcome to Caribbean Airlines. We fly the Caribbean. So, you know, we go back and forth on the pronunciation all the time, probably depending on the rhythm of the moment. So when we look at the official languages of 18 of the main countries or nations, because some of the numbers I referred to are more territories, because we can't count Martinique, Guadeloupe, and French Guiana as separate countries yet. So in terms of the main language or the official language of the Americas and the official language of the official main language of the Caribbean, most people would say English because of the size of the US and Canada and the number of Caribbean nations I just mentioned. However, that language is Spanish. Spanish is the first language of the Americas, probably thanks to the Treaty of Tordesillas, when the Pope just decided to divide the world in Spanish and Portuguese. And after Spanish comes English, and then after English comes Portuguese because of Brazil. So Brazil alone has 210 million Portuguese speakers. So in terms of Spanish, our main speakers are located in the island Caribbean. Our main speakers are all in the Greater Antilles, so Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico. But in the rest of the Caribbean, like Belize, Aruba, Curacao, Bonaire, and Trinidad at Christmas time, so for those of you who know Trinidad, we suddenly start to sing in Spanish, or what we think is Spanish, at Christmas time. And then we've had an influx of over 40,000 Venezuelans because of their crisis in recent times. So our cultural landscape is changing again. Our linguistic landscape is changing. You have rooms para rentar, you know, you have signs in our maxi taxis in Spanish. You have all kinds of things going on. So, and because of the, as I mentioned earlier, the huge coastlines of Venezuela and of course Colombia, once we include most of Central America, except for the ones that are Pacific only, Spanish is really the dominant language in all its variations and all its glory. And English may have the most national flags. So if there were a roundtable discussion of Caribbean matters, English would dominate because of national flags, but that doesn't represent our actual populations and the distribution of speakers. If I'm going too fast, then somebody can just wave and just let me know if I'm okay, because I tend to get excited about linguistics, you know, that's what I do. So a note on English, as I mentioned, our number of nations doesn't correspond to the number of speakers. So my numbers will vary according to who is independent and who is still connected to a European country, or in the states of the, in the case of Puerto Rico and the United US Virgin Islands, they're connected to the US. But in terms of the English speaking or English official nations of the Americas, 13 of us are from the Caribbean, and we can include Bermuda here, even though it's really North America, and one is in South America. But the majority of speakers belong to Canada and the US. And I've had experiences where I went to like a student convention in the States at one time. It was in Chicago. And the majority of speakers there were from the Americas, and the students came from the Americas. And we were divided into Spanish and English speaking. And they did not know what to do with the Caribbean people. They said, well, we don't speak Spanish. At least the English speaking Caribbean ones. Some of us knew a little bit of Spanish, but not enough to be comfortable in a meeting. And we were told by the organizers, well, okay, you can join the North Americans because, and then they introduced us as, we're welcoming these Caribbean people because they want to be here. And we were like, well, we don't really have a choice. We don't understand Spanish. We need to be here. Otherwise, we'll have our own meeting. Because we were all students, you know, we were feeling kind of lost. And I mean, this was in the 1980s. And it was really surprising to me then and still now, if you're from Cuba, the entire Spanish-speaking world accepts you as Spanish-speaking. Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, all Spanish-speaking countries around the world know each other. But for some odd reason, and I'm coming to know more and more what it is, English speakers of the Caribbean are not seen as English speakers as much as native English speakers in a way that North Americans are. And it's a lot to do with geopolitics and size of country and the fact that we have Creole languages here. So I'll get into that point. But the fact, if we go in terms of numbers, if we had a regional roundtable, English speakers of the Caribbean would have more flags than the rest, but the number of speakers belong to Canada and the US. So English has an interesting state here, that English speakers actually not always recognized by English speakers. And we get told things like, we have exotic accents and all those kinds of things. And that's probably why I got into phonetics, because it's absolutely fascinating. So this is not us. This is the typical, if you look at languages of the Caribbean, you Google it, this is the kind of thing that you'll see, that the Caribbean is Spanish, it's Dutch, it's French, and it's English. That is actually not the case. So if we have 70 languages, how can we all boil down to just 4? And then, of course, Haiti, which people would like to claim is the biggest French-speaking country in the Caribbean, is actually the biggest Creole-speaking country in the world. So this is not the approach that linguists take, but this is the general approach that people like to divide us up into. And even when CARICOM had a Haitian president, his mission was to get French as an official language of CARICOM. And he quite ignored his own language, which makes Haiti quite unique and distinct. So we'll talk about I'd love to see a proper map of the Caribbean, but trying to fit 70 languages in may be a bit of a challenge. So this is useful for history, but not useful for our modern reality. So I'll just quickly talk about what are the languages of the Caribbean, things like bilingualism and the future of our languages, if we can even dare to talk about that, and some final thoughts. So I mentioned all this already, just to run through some statistics. As I say, the statistics vary, but the main thing that I want to focus on is that languages do not respect borders. And thanks to modern technology, such as airplanes, we don't even respect the airspace. So we will find our Caribbean languages all around the world. And the two that dominate most heavily are Haitian and Jamaican. And largely because of things like culture and music. And the fact is that culture and music are connected to people. So it means that in the diaspora, Haitian and Jamaican have been the most famous ones. I mean, Haitian language music in Canada, I understand, is a big thing, Haitian rap. And they have all these collaborations going on now. And of course, Jamaican people want to learn Jamaican so that they can sing dancehall properly in Poland. And they have Polish people learning Jamaican, you have Japanese people learning Jamaican. Is quite an amazing thing. So languages like Jamaican and Haitian are being called now transnational languages, because they are crossing all kinds of borders, and young people are quite able to adapt to them.
Amazing.
So this is one older view of the Caribbean. Well, it's a modern view trying to be old. And this is somebody's version of if the Caribbean had been left as Taino. Now, of course, Taino is mainly a Greater Antillean name, but if the Caribbean had been left as a Taino, Arawakan-speaking area, these would be our names. So some of the places like Jamaica and Cuba have actually kept their names. Puerto Rico, Borinquen, they are known by that name quite commonly. Aruba and Curacao. So if we had to revise several language maps, this is one person's version. I hear it's not 100% accurate, but I think it's a nice effort to see all these beautiful names that some have been preserved, some have gone. Bimini is still there, Bahamas still there. They have quite a few. Our name in Trinidad is quite gone, except in memories, because we have a Spanish name and a Trinidad, of course, means Holy Trinity, and Tobago means more like cigar or it's related to tobacco. So I told somebody once that if you translate Trinidad and Tobago, you actually get holy smoke. Sorry for the crappy, the corny joke. So anyway, what are these languages? The the indigenous languages. So in the Caribbean, we have 7. The name that's been chosen now is Maipurian. The traditional grouping that we say is Arawakan or Arawak. And we have 7 languages in the Caribbean space, which is mainly Guyana and French Guyana and Suriname. So Arawak is probably the most famous one, now called Lokono, because this is their name for themselves. Garifuna left St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the island Caribbean and ended up in Belize, Honduras, and now it's in New York, wherever Central Americans have gone who speak the language. And these others with asterisks, they are highly endangered and may not be around in the next generation. Palikur crosses French Guyana and Brazil, and Wapishana is in Brazil and Guyana. And then the Caribbean languages. So it's interesting that the Caribbean has a Caribbean-based name itself, so connected to Carib. But none of these languages is official. Wai and Mapuche and Guyana and Pimon is right next door in Brazil, in Venezuela, sorry. And so these languages are still around, many with small numbers of speakers trying to stabilize and revive their languages. So there's 17 indigenous languages, and we haven't even started to count the ones in Belize because these are those ones I looked at are Caribbean Arawak. But then in Belize, we have the Mayan languages. In the parts of the Guyanas, we have the Tupi languages. And then right here in Trinidad and Venezuela, we have Warao. So those of you who know Trinidad, we have a few towns like Chaguaramas, which is one of our few Warao names. It's a language isolate, supposedly related to nobody. But it's still around. And because Trinidad, the name of the language and the people mean the people of the boat. And they are basically Orinoco Delta people. And Trinidad practically sits in the mouth of the Orinoco River. So they have not been counted as part of Trinidad and Tobago society in recent times, but they're very much here. And also when the wave of Venezuelan migrants started, the Warao went from Venezuela came to Trinidad, they went to Guyana because of that border situation. So we have all kinds of things happening, and it's because we don't speak the languages. These languages are not taught in our context. So it's not like I can pick up a book and say, okay, let me go and find a Warao speaker in San Fernando and interview them. And so the things like health issues. So when a Warao speaker from Venezuela comes in the middle of a migrant crisis and they don't speak Spanish and nobody speaks Warao, we ended up having to contact a Polish researcher based in the Netherlands who was working with colleagues in California to get some materials because, you know, it's crazy the way we don't even understand our own context. And indigenous languages are still pushed into the background, but these are real people we're dealing with. In terms of European languages, of course, we have the ones that we know. We have 2 Romance languages, French and Spanish, sorry, Portuguese should be across on the other side, but French and Spanish have been official for a long time. The Germanic ones, we have Dutch, English, and Plaudish, which is in Belize. I really don't know why Portuguese slid across there, but Portuguese would be like a small pockets of people and connected to post-emancipation migration, especially in Trinidad and St. Vincent and Guyana. African languages, as far as we know, we just have 1 left from the emancipation, post-emancipation era, which is Cromanti or Coromantee in Jamaica, and it is an Akan Tree language of Guyana. Now, Lukumi is still supposed to be used religiously in Cuba, and there are Yoruba elements in Trinidad because of songs and prayers. And we have aspects of Fon and Bay languages found in Salamacan in Suriname, and Eastern Ijo has considerably influenced Berbice Dutch, which is now unfortunately, a dead Creole language, but all the research points to how much Ijo Berbice Dutch had in a way that other Caribbean languages don't have as much. Arabic came with African Muslims, but the Arabic that we have in the Caribbean is now spoken by Levantine peoples, mainly Syrian and Lebanese peoples, and of course, classical Arabic, which is not the same as Levantine Arabic, is used among Muslims of Indian, African, Arab background. Because of, and I put Arabic here because Arabic is a Semitic language, but it's also connected to much of African history. So Creole languages are the ones that dominate in numbers. French lexified or French related. Dominica is an interesting case because the north of Dominica is more like the Guadeloupean Creole, and the south of Dominica is more like Martinican Creole. Then you have French Guyanese, which has influenced Caripuna and Galemi in Brazil. So we have Caribbean languages reaching to Brazil, reaching here and there because of borders. Haitian is the only official French Creole language. Saint Lucian is in the process of becoming official. And because of the connections between Louisiana and Haiti, we include Louisiana French Creole among the French Creole languages of the Caribbean. Basically, the Caribbean is trying to remind everybody that we are the heart and soul of the Americas. It all started here, and languages abound. Languages make these great connections. So nobody knows what to call Papiamento. They don't know whether to call it a Spanish Creole or a Portuguese Creole or Portuguese and Spanish one. So we just call it Iberian. And then Palenquero in Colombia, still around. And those are the only two interesting reasons why we have more French and more English than we have Iberian. And the only other Spanish lexified Creole in the world is in the Philippines, which is Chabacano. And then, of course, the English ones, I'll get to the Dutch ones in a minute. English ones, they're probably more than these, but there are lots. And we have every territory can basically claim their own English Creole variety. For Bahamian, they say it's very much like Gullah Geechee in the Carolinas, and everybody understands each other, food-wise and language-wise. Jamaican, I'm including the Maroon Spirit language, which is MSL, which is found in places like Moortown, where some people are still able to communicate with their ancestors through this spirit language, which has elements of a country in it as well. Quinty is in one of the Guyanas, and people have doubts about Barbadian and about Trinidadian. So these lists will vary. In terms of the Creole languages that have Dutch vocabulary, all of them are extinct. Berbice Dutch lost its last speaker in the last 10 years, and Scapi Dutch died long before that. And they're both in Guyana, and Nega Hollands was up in the Virgin Islands area, and that they all died. There was Danish around as well, but no traces of it left, except in history. So some important notes, just sort of, as I say, make the connections. The Creole languages of North America include the Sea Islands Creole, which is Gullah Geechee, and Afro-Seminole in Florida and elsewhere. And then in South and Central America, we have English Creoles in Colombia. In fact, the whole of that Central American coastline, as well as the islands of the area. The Colombian one's interesting. They call Jamaican rice and beans. So the name is what is Southern Caribbean, but the dish is Northern Caribbean. So they have all these kind of cross things going on. I was telling Peter my experience there, and he had the same thing, I think, about, I saw this sign saying pan bun. I'm like, what is pan bun? And then realized afterwards when I heard the recipe, I said, oh, Jamaican bun. So spellings and pronunciation, there's so many connections there. People just took boats and went across there and developed things. So that is the San Andres, Providencia, and Santa Catalina. And then Limon in Costa Rica, the Bay Islands in Honduras, Wari Wari in Panama, and Mosquito and Bluefields in Nicaragua. All of these have a huge Jamaican influence, but not just Jamaican, which is interesting, especially in the case of Panama, which of course had the Panama Canal and had folks coming from all over the world, all over the Caribbean to settle there. So you have a lot of places in Panama with people with English surnames because of the English official Caribbean. So all these connections, and we consider all of this Caribbean. So the Asian languages include Caribbean Hindustani, which we call Bhojpuri as well, Hindi and Urdu, and Sindhi, which is across the Caribbean, but they're very, very quiet communities. The Sindhi speakers tend to marry among themselves, and they're losing their languages as well. They tend to be like jewelers, in like a St. Martin. In the old days, a St. Martin-based jeweler would arrange a marriage with a Trinidadian-based Sindhi jeweler and that kind of thing. Chinese, Mandarin is, which I'll mention later, is the one taught in the Confucius Institute, but our traditional Chinese languages here in the Caribbean will include Hakka and Cantonese, which is also called Yu. And we have Austronesian and Hmong languages in Suriname and French Guiana. So Suriname has Javanese, and French Guiana has Hmong. So these are very interesting. And Cuba has Japanese, or used to at some point. So all these interesting pockets that make our region quite diverse. Then we have the sign languages. There are many more in the Greater Caribbean, but I just picked a few out. Jamaica stands out because it has two indigenous sign languages that we know about. They have Country Sign, or KS, and they have Jamaican Sign Language. And then all these others are indigenous sign languages. Many of them, like in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, the earliest sign language that was documented had some British Sign Language influence because of the missionaries and the schools that were started. And then because of the way things work nowadays, it's more American Sign Language. So the average older deaf person in Trinidad, and probably in Jamaica and other places too, will be able to understand aspects of British Sign Language, will be able to understand American Sign Language. So there's even bilingualism and trilingualism going on in the deaf communities, and all these things are being documented. And there's just one more to end off with. Langai is a Haitian Voodoo cultural language, but it's a second language only. It's not learned at home as a mother tongue. I'm not sure how dominant it is now, but that has been noted in the literature. So that's a huge overview, I think, of moving us away from the French, Spanish, English, Dutch categorization of the Caribbean. And we're really much more diverse. And the irony of the Caribbean is that, yes, we expect the minority languages to be overlooked because of the small pockets of people, small numbers, the dispersal of these languages all over, not any strong centered communities. But the irony of the Caribbean is that our majority languages are the ones that are marginalized, almost in a way that the minority languages are already minoritized. So it's a unique place where the colonial languages dominate the Creole languages, which in turn dominate the indigenous languages and the sign languages. So, but the dominance of Creole languages is really only in numbers of speakers, except in places like Jamaica and St. Lucia, and Haiti to many degrees, where these languages are coming into their own, because Haiti and Curacao and Aruba have official Creole languages in their constitution and in their daily lives, but somebody in Curacao will be speaking 4 or 5 languages, and Papiamento has a strong place in the heart of the ABC Islands, but not necessarily in the education system. And same for Haiti, that Haiti might have French Creole or Haitian French Creole as one of their official languages. But for Haitians to get a number of documents and for the education system to be predominantly in French in some areas contradicts the majority numbers status of our Creole languages. So we have a kind of an attitude problem towards our Creole languages. So in terms of bilingualism, are we
Joanne,
monolingual?
wait, Joanne, we're down to just about 5 minutes.
Okay, so I'll just end up with this, that thank you. Are we monolingual or bilingual or multilingual? We're all of the above, depending on where you come from. And this is another view of the Creole languages of the Caribbean. A better map, but it doesn't include indigenous languages, and it doesn't include the sign languages and so on. So I won't get in, so I just mentioned the official status affects language attitudes, and the official status of Caribbean languages has affected how we view the non-official ones, especially when those non-official ones have a vocabulary relationship to the main ones. And that's basically the overview that I wanted to give. That we have lots of multilingualism going on, especially in the Dutch Caribbean. And we have Guyana is more and more recognizing their multilingualism. St. Lucia to some extent, as I said. And to end off, we need to develop what we call in linguistics sociolinguistic profiles, because it affects education, it affects health, and whenever we have political issues in surrounding areas, people start to move again and the language situation starts to change. So that's basically it for me.
Thank you very much.